Hello, everybody, and welcome to Macro Pro and Friends webinar series. We are really glad that you're here with us today. I know that we have had a lot of webinars here recently, so I'm wondering if you could put in the chat box how many of the 12 CEUs of Christmas you've attended so far. So while you're doing that, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to chat with my coworker, Mandy Farquhar. So today's webinar is worth 1 CEU credit. You'll be receiving that in 1 hour as long as you are logged onto the GoToWebinar platform. So if you're calling in, they will not be able to get your time and attendance, so make sure that you use the link and that you are watching it or hearing it on a screen. In addition to that, there are handouts for this presentation. Make sure that you download them. They're on the control console. One of our guests is going to be fielding your questions. So if you have any questions for our guests today, please make sure that you put them in the question box and we will ask those as they come up. And then lastly, if you'd like to see this or any other program that we have, you can see it on the Macro Pro YouTube channel. So that was a mouthful, Mandy. A little bit tired here. So how are you, Mandy?
Good, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me with you today.
Yes, I'm really glad that you're here. So have you been attending all of the webinars? How many have you been able to watch?
I did 6 of them so far.
So that sounds great. So we have other ones coming up. Can you tell everybody what those are?
Yes, the 11th day of Christmas, Macro Pro and Friends will be the bingo. That should be a good one. And then we have the 12th day of Christmas on Wednesday is cyber attacks. So those are going to be 2 good ones to listen to.
Yeah, and the bingo's on Tuesday, as I recall.
Tuesday,
so
yeah.
If you haven't registered, then you can do that at the Macro Pro website. What are you doing for the holidays? First, let me ask you, what are you eating for the holidays? That's always important.
Well, we do half Italian. My mom's Italian, and then we do the traditional, we do the lasagna for the Italians, and then we do the roast and vegetables and all the fun appetizers and cheeses and fun. I love Christmas, Diane. So I go all out on Christmas.
So I'm gonna make a prime rib, and I'm gonna give anybody out there that has been afraid to make a prime rib the easiest recipe that you'll ever make, and you'll never make a mistake, because I never wanted to do it because I was afraid it was going to waste that money. So you take your prime rib, you put it out so it's room temperature, and then you take a soft butter, and with your soft butter you put in it, you mix in lots and lots of different seasonings, twice as much as you think you need. So all the seasonings you would put on a dry prime rib, you would put inside of that butter. Then you're going to give your prime rib a butter bath, and you're just going to wrap it up in butter, right? You're gonna put that in your oven at 500 degrees for 5 minutes for every pound. So if it's 8 pounds, you're gonna put it in the oven for 40 minutes at 500 degrees. Then you're gonna turn the oven off, and you're gonna leave it in there for 2 hours. Put a big note on there. I put a note on my door. It says, open this door and you will die, because we can't let that heat out, because that's really important. And it's perfect every single time. So
I'm gonna try that.
Okay, well, you have to let me know how that turns out, but every year it's perfect. So that's my little Christmas hint for everybody. So Mandy, could you introduce our guest today?
Sure. We have Darcy Simmons. She's the director with Paradigm, who has a great session on audiology. Do you want to share with us who your speaker is going to be? And
yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Darcy Simmons. I am with Paradigm. So thank you, ladies, both for having us on today. I really appreciate it, and working with Macro Pro and Friends. I'm Darcy Simmons. I'm the regional executive for Paradigm for the whole West Coast. And Paradigm is a nationwide company. The services that we're offering is the home health, anything encompassed in the home, DME, medical services and supplies, orthotics and prosthetics, home and vehicle modifications, post-acute care facilities, and of course, case management. So today I have our in-network provider, Jordon Burch, who I've worked with for years. He's going to be talking about audiology. So I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to you, Jordon. And if anybody has questions at any time, this is an open forum, so we can go ahead and you can put your question in the box, and then I will get those questions over to you, Jordon.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Diane and Mandy for having us. So, anytime I do this presentation in person, I always ask, what do you believe is the most common injury out there? And inevitably, we always hear, wrist injuries, knee, back, shoulder, rotator cuffs, and those types of injuries. But would you believe it if I told you that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that occupational hearing loss is one of the most common work-related illnesses in the United States? They estimate that 22 million workers are exposed to potentially damaging noise each year, 18% of which have hearing loss. That's roughly 4 million workers on an annual basis suffer hearing loss. And we expect this number to increase as baby boomers retire. OSHA didn't start requiring on-site job testing for hearing loss until 1986. Some of these ladies and gentlemen that began working before then never actually had a baseline test and never had annual screenings. And so it's hard to prove whether or not their hearing loss occurred on the work site or if it actually is just from recreational, noise exposure. But one other interesting fact here is, the age group of 18 to 25-year-olds are actually outpacing baby boomers for hearing loss right now in the United States because of direct input headphones, like Apple iPods, Dr. Dre Beats headphones, Bose headphones. They are causing more hearing loss than what baby boomers are suffering hearing loss at today. Audiologists and ear, nose, and throat doctors divide the ear up into three separate parts. If you guys can see my mouse here, I'm highlighting the pinna. The pinna is what channels sound down the auditory canal. The auditory canal is not this straight in length. It typically has two bends to it and bends back towards the base of your temples. You've all heard that adage, never put anything in your ear smaller than the tip of your elbow. Reason being is you can actually, number one, rupture the eardrum. You can go in so deep that you can actually puncture the eardrum. It's just a thin, skin layer there that protects the, middle and inner ear. But the other reason is, all of your wax glands are produced here on the outer half of the ear. So you using a Q-tip, for example, you can actually force earwax down into the canal and create an earwax dam, which prevents sound from channeling down the auditory canal and pushing up against the eardrum. So that all makes up the outer ear. In the inner ear, you have the three smallest bones of your body. You have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The stapes is what presses up against the oval window of the cochlea. But if you've ever gone up in elevation or you scuba dive, you got to clear your ears. Otherwise, the pressure from the middle ear to the outer ear, can become extremely painful. And the way you clear your ears is by swallowing, plugging your nose, blowing water, or not blowing water, but blowing air up into your ears through the eustachian tubes. The eustachian tube drains into the back of your throat, and it also keeps the middle ear free of fluids. Big reason that kids and infants get earaches is because these eustachian tubes their faces haven't grown, and they sit more on a horizontal plane than they do a vertical plane, and so that fluid doesn't actively drain out of the middle ear into the back of their throats, and so they can have a pressure buildup of fluid in the middle ear, and so they put tubes in the ears, which allows that fluid to drain out into the auditory canal. Eventually, those tubes will pop out, and the eardrum will repair itself. So this all makes up the middle ear. But the stapes pressing up against the cochlea is in the inner ear. So you have the outer, middle, and now we're in the inner ear. And inside the cochlea, this is where all of our workers' compensation noise-induced hearing loss claims take place. This is where we cause all damage to our ears from, loud noise exposure, whether it's running a jackhammer or, going to a rock concert. These are all things that can cause hearing loss in your ears. Inside the cochlea, which is shaped like a seashell, there's a lot of tiny hair cells. And as those hair cells are overexposed to noise, they start to bend and they start to break until there's nothing left there for that noise energy to press up against. And so you don't perceive it as sound. Those hair cells, those cilia, each one of us a nerve fiber, and they send a triggering signal down the auditory nerve, the cochlear nerve, to the brain, and that's how we hear sound. So the different types of loss that are out there is sensorial. This is the typical loss that we see within workers' compensation because it takes place inside the cochlea. There's a conductive loss. Conductive loss could be that earwax plug in the outer ear. It could be a ruptured eardrum, or it could be a fluid buildup in the middle ear. And then it's also possible to have some mixture of both a sensorial and a conductive type loss. So as we go through this presentation, I will share with you guys how to tell the difference between a sensorial and a conductive hearing loss, especially when you're looking at an audiogram. Diving a little bit further into a conductive type loss, easiest way to remember it is conductive is typically temporary. You can correct conductive type hearing loss with surgery. So surgery to replace or repair the small bones in the inner ear, medicine to help, drain out the middle ear if there's a fluid buildup, or, surgery to repair the ruptured eardrum if it doesn't actively repair itself. So conductive is temporary. There are things to correct a conductive type hearing loss. So used to be in private practice in Northern California, and one day this gentleman comes in complaining that he can't hear. So upon looking down his auditory canal, I could see that in his ear there was something blocking the auditory pathway for the acoustic sound to get to his eardrum. And pulling this plug out, so he obviously had forced earwax down in his canal, which created a plug, but mixed in that plug was this thread that was intertwined in there deep in his ear, but there was also this battery tab, and that was all down inside of his auditory canal. It was, if you look at the eardrum here, it was pressed up right against the eardrum way in deep. Upon removing that earwax plug, he, couldn't hear perfectly, but he could hear much better. So that helped things out. So conductive is temporary. Sensorial is permanent. Here you have the oval window of the cochlea, and as you go deeper and deeper inside the cochlea, sounds also become deeper and deeper. Each of these hair cells, these are the cilia I was talking about. Each one represents a different tone or a different frequency, similar to like a keyboard piano. As you go from, right to left, sounds become deeper and deeper, right? Those are your low tones. So as you go deeper inside the cochlea, sounds also become deeper. The reason that we see a lot of high frequency loss within workers' compensation is related to the fact that these hair cells on the outer half, these are all exposed to those loud or damaging noises first. So these are the first hair cells that start to bend and they start to break. The typical adult can hear out to roughly 8,000 hertz. A dog whistle takes place between 12 to 14,000 hertz. So it's a high-pitched noise. And a lot of people can still hear a dog whistle, but when we test an individual, we test from 250 hertz, which is a low tone, to the high-pitched noise, which is 8,000 hertz. And in that range, that's where all of speech takes place as well. And so that's why they limit it from 250 to 8,000 hertz when testing someone's hearing. But sensorineural is permanent. The only treatment is to make sounds louder and therefore more perceptible. And so hearing aids would fit that category. This is, these are the type of people that we're fitting within the work comp world when it comes to hearing loss. Here is a great example of someone that was overexposed to noise in the workplace. This is a microscopic view of the cochlea from a gentleman that worked in the mines in West Virginia for over 30 years without hearing protection. So you can imagine being down underground for that amount of time with the explosions, jackhammers, all the other noises that could take place, those reverberant noises bouncing off of the walls and just being channeled into this gentleman's ears. And these hair cells, which are typically, stand up straight like a bristle of a toothbrush, were overexposed and they started to bend, they started to break until there was nothing left. And here on the right-hand side, you can see that damaged cochlea, where there's very few cilia or nerve fibers that are left to pick up and perceive sound. This gentleman is probably beyond the range of which a hearing aid could actually benefit him, and he would be more of a candidate for cochlear implants. But it is a great example to see these hair cells actually broken off. Some different causes of hearing loss, there's really too many to cover completely, but these include some of the following. Congenital predisposition towards nerve loss. Some people are born with better hearing than others. Deformity or some kind of ear canal obstruction like what I showed you, that would be considered a conductive loss, and that can be repaired with surgery. Tympanic membrane or middle ear damage disorders. So what we see a lot with flight attendants or even pilots is if they have a head cold and can't clear their ears fast enough when they go up in elevation or they're coming down because the eustachian tube is plugged, it can rupture the eardrum.
Jordan, I do have a question. Somebody's asking does sensorineural tend to happen in one ear or both ears or at the same time?
It really depends on, where that exposure took place. It's interesting. Typically it is in both ears because both ears might be exposed to the damage or any kind of incoming sound. But something we see in police officers, firemen, truck drivers is if they drive around with the window open on their left side and that wind is always buffering against their ear, it can cause, a monaural hearing loss, so hearing loss in their left ear only. So we do see hearing loss in one ear versus, two, but I would say 95% of the time it is in both ears together, and it's pretty uniform versus just the one. But there are those isolated scenarios where it is in just one. So ototoxic drug use can cause hearing loss. And then, age-related hearing loss, we're all going to suffer hearing loss as we get older and older. The average infant from the time you're born, they estimate you could hear out to 20,000 hertz, which is a high-pitched noise, to where the average adult can hear now, which is 8,000 hertz. So as you're exposed to noise from the time you were, an infant, a child, teenager, growing up, you've been experiencing hearing loss, and we will all suffer from some degree of hearing loss or another. And then obviously the noise exposure as well, which would be considered, noise exposure hearing loss, which would be a sensorineural. And, as the person who asked the question wondered, you can have hearing loss in one ear and you can also have it in both ears. It really depends on which ear might have been exposed to noise the worst. I mentioned that opioid abuse can cause hearing loss, and the abuse of opioids, the way they work is they attack those nerve fibers, and so they attack those nerve fibers in the cochlea, those cilia, to the point where it completely erodes them. it can, just completely level out those hearing cells. But one well-known association with that is Rush Limbaugh. Rush admitted to a long-term addiction to, oxycodone and hydrocodone, and subsequently to back surgery. He entered rehabilitation around that same time, but he went to bed one night and woke up the next day and he had no hearing in both ears. Whatever he was, self-prescribing had caused those hair cells to completely erode. And so, from that time forward in 2003 to the time he passed away here just a few years ago, he actually wore cochlear implants, which you may or may not have known. There is a great success rate with cochlear implants. One other sign and thing that is tied to hearing loss sometimes is tinnitus or tinnitus, ringing in the ears. How many of you guys have ever experienced tinnitus yourself? If you've gone to a loud concert, and you drive home, you go to bed and you're laying in bed and you can kind of still hear what sounds like maybe it's the ocean or, a loud squeal within your ears. That is, a temporary threshold shift, and that is what we call ringing in the ears or tinnitus. This is really the first sign of hearing loss or hearing damage. But, over 50 million Americans have experienced tinnitus, and 1 in 5 people with tinnitus have bothersome tinnitus, to the point where it can actually drive a person crazy because they can't get away from that sound that's always taking place within the ear. Technology within the last 4 to 5 years has got to the point where we can now identify the ringing in the ears at the frequency, and in one of the programs of a hearing aid, we can actually create a fractal tone or a masking white noise at that same frequency to eliminate it, similar to like a noise cancellation headphone. So as long as they're wearing those hearing aids, we can mask out those sounds or the ringing in the ears. So why does tinnitus take place? If you go back to this picture of this gentleman that worked in the mines in West Virginia, on the left-hand side, you have a healthy cochlea. On the right, you have the damaged cochlea. With those damaged hair cells there, they'll sit there looking for a sound signal to pick up, and they'll sit there and quiver. And as they're quivering, it sends a sound signal through the cochlear nerve, the auditory nerve, to your brain, and you perceive that as sound that's not actually present because those hair cells are quivering, looking for a sound signal to pick up, which isn't there. And that's why, tinnitus, ringing in the ears does take place. But there are, hearing aids can mask that out. If you were to Google tinnitus treatments, here are the first 24 things that would come up in Google. But what's interesting is, none of these have strong evidence that actually have any actual direct benefit on the management of that tinnitus. So there's a lot of, theories on what can help dampen it or, alleviate that ringing in the ears, but there's none that actually have strong evidence other than masking out that sound, which isn't even a true treatment. It's just masking it through, fitting hearing aids. As I mentioned, 1986, OSHA started requiring any organization that exposed their workers to noises over 85 decibel levels that they would have to have a hearing conservation program. What they found is that someone that was exposed to 90 decibels and they worked there for 8 hours, they were causing, potentially damaging noise. So the time weighted average of 8 hours at 90 decibel levels, you were causing, permanent hearing loss. As you simply go up 5 decibel levels to 95, 4 hours of exposure, so it cuts the time in half, to the point where you get to 100 decibels, it's just 2 hours of exposure, you'll cause permanent hearing loss until you get to 120 decibel levels, 7.5 minutes of exposure, you can cause permanent hearing loss. They call that the halving rule, the 5 dB exchange rate with your time-weighted average of noise exposure. So at 120 decibel levels, 7.5 minutes of exposure without hearing protection, you'll cause hearing loss. So if you consider that 120 decibel levels is equivalent to operating heavy equipment, just, if you didn't wear hearing protection for, that 7.5 minutes or longer, you are potentially causing permanent hearing loss. The threshold of pain is equivalent to roughly, 140 decibel levels. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, so, obviously follow football, and, our closest team is the Seahawks. Last night the Seahawks were beaten by the San Francisco 49ers, if any of you guys happen to watch that. But, the Seahawks claim to have the loudest NFL stadium at 134.4 decibel levels of exposure. So, they're right there at the threshold of pain in the stadium. And, whether you believe that's all natural or if they pipe in sound, who knows? But the Seahawks claim to have the loudest stadium, not that it helps their winning record. Some other things to point out on here, how a nightclub, if you go to a nightclub, obviously those are loud environments. Construction site, boiler room at 90 dB. I always ask the question, how many of you guys have been exposed to noise in a boiler room lately? Just because boiler rooms typically don't exist. And I recently had someone that raised their hand and told me that they worked in the boiler room on the paddle ship on Tom Sawyer Island at Disney World. And so they were down there in the boiler room for 2 hours at a time. Disney would put them down there, and they admitted that it was loud, but they were only down there for 2 hours at a time next to that boiler. A gunfire, just one single shot from a gun is equivalent to about 160 dB. So without hearing protection, you're beyond the threshold of pain, and are causing permanent damage without hearing protection in place. If you've ever had your hearing tested, they sit you down in a soundproof room and they give you that Jeopardy buzzer, one for your left ear in your left hand and one for your right ear in your right hand. And they're going to introduce different sounds at different frequency levels and volume levels as well. And, as you hear that sound, as you perceive that sound, you will click the buzzer and they'll plot your audiogram. So, they will introduce sounds starting at 250 hertz, and they'll just go straight across to 8,000 hertz. The typical loss that we see within workers' compensation is someone will have a hearing loss, normal hearing, out to roughly 1,000 to 1,500 hertz, and then it'll drop off sharply. It's called a precipitous loss or ski sloping loss, where you have a high frequency hearing loss. Something that's also different about the audiology world versus OSHA and work comp standards is, the American Academy of Audiology states that anyone that has hearing loss beyond 20 dB, you are stated to have hearing loss. The work comp world and OSHA state that anyone beyond 25 dB that's considered hearing loss within workers' compensation. So it's always good to know those differences, because honestly, some audiologists don't realize that there is a difference between the audiology world and the OSHA world when it comes to defining hearing loss. So normal hearing, 0 to 25 dB. And then you have mild, moderate, severe, profound, and deaf. The gentleman that worked in West Virginia, his hearing loss would be under the consideration of profound to deaf. And, he's beyond the range for hearing aids. He's more of a candidate for cochlear implants. So how do you tell the difference between a conductive and a sensorineural hearing loss? First of all, when you see an audiogram come through, you have, the line represented in red. This would represent the right ear. The line in blue, this is your left ear. If it comes across in black and white, you can always tell the difference between the right ear is represented with an O and the left ear is represented with an X, in case both these lines are black. But this line that you see, this is the pure tone test results. So they put those earmuffs on you in that sound room and gave you the Jeopardy buzzer to buzz in anytime you could hear the sound, and you buzzed in, and they introduced sound, which traveled through the auditory canal, the outer ear to the middle ear, vibrated the three smallest bones of your body in the inner ear, and press up against the cochlea, of the oval window, and in turn triggered the hair cells inside the cochlea. That pure tone test uses all three areas of your ear to plot that audiogram. Then what they do is they put a bone oscillator here behind your ear on each side, and they vibrate your skull. So if you tap on your skull behind your ear, you can actually hear it echoing inside your ear. You're bypassing the outer ear and middle ear with the three small bones of your body, and you're directly stimulating the cilia, or the hair cells inside the cochlea directly. That is represented with these brackets that you can see. These are all their bone conduction scores. So you have the pure tone and bone conduction scores. Those need to be within 10 decimal levels of each other to be considered a sensorial hearing loss. If it's greater than 10 dB, it would be considered a conductive loss, and there's something else going on there, which could be something as simple as that, like earwax plug, or a fluid buildup in the middle ear, or a ruptured eardrum. Those are all illustrations of a conductive loss. So conductive loss is temporary. Those can generally be repaired with surgery, medicine, or just time. If it is a sensorial hearing loss, then that's repairable with hearing aids. So that's how you tell the difference between a conductive and sensorial hearing loss. The other thing to look at on these audiograms is their speech reception threshold scores with word recognition. So this gentleman in his left ear, he got 87% of the words that were read off to him. The audiologist reads off a list of 50 words, and he has to repeat them. So with amplification at 70 dB, he got 87% of those words accurate. In his right ear, he got 90% right at 65 decimal levels of amplification. So his right ear is definitely better than his left ear. He needs more amplification in his left ear to understand speech. This area in gray, this is what I was talking about with the speech banana. You hear all speech between 250 to roughly 8,000 hertz. Sounds like duh, buh, e, ah, o, those are all sounds that this gentleman could hear without issue and with no hearing aids. But you look at sounds like pa, ha, ja, ka, ta, sh. Those are higher pitched noises, which he would need amplification to be able to hear those sounds, and hearing aids would benefit this person. So this is a great example of a sensorial hearing loss where hearing aids would benefit them. So here I'm going to show you three different audiograms that look very similar, but they actually require three different actions to treat this claimant. Audiogram number one is actually the audiogram that I just showed you. I walked you through. They have a high pitch, high frequency hearing loss in both ears. They're a great candidate for hearing aids. So sensory hearing loss, they're a great candidate for hearing aids. If you look at the second audiogram here, it looks very, very similar to the first one. You can see their pure tone scores here, but if you look at the brackets for their left ear, the brackets are up within normal range, and it's greater than 10 decimal levels. So they actually have a conductive hearing loss and there's something else going on there that needs to be investigated. So this would be an example of a conductive loss. It could be something very simple. And then if you look at audiogram number 3, you can see the pure tone test. It's still the same. The brackets are within the 10 decimal levels of each other. But if you look at the word recognition scores, especially his speech reception threshold scores, he got 12% of the words right at 70 decibel levels. And so there's something else going on that he's not able to understand speech. And this also needs to be investigated further, because it could be, you know, a tumor pressed up against the cochlear nerve, auditory nerve in his inner ear. There could be a perception issue in, you know, in his head. And so, you know, it's a good rule of thumb to refer this one out for a full MRI, because there is something else going on there. It'd be, you know, almost like talking Mandarin Chinese, you know, in his, you know, left ear, English in his right, and it just, it would drive someone crazy without this being looked into further to figure out what's going on. So those are 3 different examples of audiograms. They all look very similar, but each one requires, you know, a different treatment to figure out what's going on. As you may or may not know, Medicare does not cover the routine hearing exams, hearing aids, or exams for fitting hearing aids. As a result, you know, most states don't have a stated fee schedule when it comes to hearing aids and, you know, in the audiology space. And hearing aid can, you know, fluctuate greatly. You know, here are some examples of providers that are charging way more than they ever should. This provider, state of California, they were charging, you know, $15,990 for an Oticon Open hearing aid. You know, there's no fee schedule, so they think they can get away with it, but this is typical price for a set of these hearing aids is somewhere between $5,000 to $6,000 for the same devices. Another example came across in California. This one also for a Oticon Open hearing device with TV adapter. You know, they always want the connectivity to your TV or what other else device they're going to be using. But the total cost on that one they're trying to charge is $13,970. Once again, you know, that's a product that typically costs between $5,000 to $6,000 in, you know, in the open market. But this provider is taking advantage of the system of a non-fee schedule device. So it's always great to get multiple bids on these. And, you know, because you should always pay the same, you know, consistent low pricing available in all 50 states, regardless of where they are, whether it's California or, you know, New York, Florida, it will be the same price across the country. You know, region doesn't vary price at all. So the different styles of hearing aids that are available, you have the BTE behind the ear. It's this device. You have the microphones that fit behind the ear, picks up sound, and it channels sound down this tube or this wire to where the speaker, and they actually call this the receiver, that fits down inside the auditory canal. 80% of all the products that are fit are this, you know, BTE. Another classification of the BTE is the receiver in the ear or the right product. You know, receiver in the canal. So 80% of all the products within workers' compensation are this product right here, and it is a, you know, it does well and it fits most hearing losses pretty well. The number one issue for, you know, people that wear hearing aids is still cosmetics and vanity. And so for those types of people, they always are looking for a custom product. Here you have the ITE. It's an in the ear, fits in the concha bowl of the ear. It's a custom made product to fit them specifically. You have the ITC in the canal. fits a little bit deeper into the canal until you get to the CIC or the invisible in the canal. These are products that fits way down in the auditory canal, and it's almost completely invisible. The challenges with these smaller products is, if you've ever taken your fingers, plugged your ears and talked, you get that loud booming noise. You get that echoing. It's called occlusion, and it can drive people crazy as well. They have single microphones, so with one microphone, it only picks up one sound source, and it's going to amplify everything together. Where if you have dual microphones, one microphone facing backwards, one microphone facing forwards, it can pick up any noise that's behind you, amplify only the noise that's coming in front of you. So it knows what sounds are behind you, amplifies the sounds that are in front of you. It's great for loud, noisy restaurants where you're trying to have a conversation. A person wearing these devices, it'll help keep all the noises behind you down. Whether it's the BTE or the invisible in the canal, CIC, it does not affect price at all. It's a lot of the same technology, but dual microphones, 1, 2 microphones versus just a single microphone. It does not affect the price. The other thing with the BTEs, you can have a lot more connectivity to your cell phone, any kind of Bluetooth, your TV, if you have Bluetooth on your TV, and so you can directly amplify sound to your devices through Bluetooth with BT type products. Here's a picture of the BTE behind the ear RIC type product. They obviously prop this one up because typically you wouldn't see that much of the device sticking up behind the pinna or the the ear, but you have the ear or the product that sits there behind the ear. Those microphones are right up here. There's going to be one facing forward, one facing backwards. You have the small tube that goes down into the ear, and then here on the right hand side, this gentleman is wearing a CIC completely in the canal or an invisible in the canal. You can just see the faceplate of the product with a single microphone. And as I mentioned, most workers, when they haven't worn hearing aids before, always ask for the small product because of that cosmetics issue. But anyone that's worn hearing aids for a while realizes that these will perform better, and typically you can't see them either. They've also become smaller and smaller, and they just perform a lot better. These also perform a lot better with high frequency hearing loss. And these CICs, because they use a smaller battery, the processor isn't as big, they are typically, underpowered. They're prone to whistle feedback on each other. Just because someone has more hearing loss doesn't necessarily mean they need more expensive technology. And typically that's completely opposite. If someone has a pretty profound hearing loss, all they need is amplification. They need a device that's got a lot of power and that can amplify sound so they can understand speech in noise. What usually affects hearing aid pricing more than anything else is the technology that goes with it. So, how much connectivity does the hearing aid have? Does it connect to my TV? Does it connect with my radio, my cell phone, my MP3 player? How much can that device do? And that's really what's affecting hearing aid prices today. 99% of the codes that are used are these V codes that are on the screen now. They're all V codes. The 5 represents the fact that it's a hearing aid. 2, that it's digital. These codes haven't been updated in so long. All hearing aids are digital, but there's still codes out there for an analog product. There's also codes for a programmable product. While digital hearing aids are programmable, they're not, programmable with a screw set, which some of the old hearing aids prior to 2000 used to utilize to, change adjust the sound that you hear, almost like an equalizer, where you can adjust the high frequencies, or only where you need to hear more amplification, you need more gain, you can adjust those channels or those bands separately. So all hearing aids are digital, and then you monaural, one hearing aid, versus binaural, two hearing aids. Like I said, 95% of the time, two hearing aids are always fit. And then you have the size of the hearing aid too that goes with it, whether it's a CIC or ITC, in the canal, in the ear, behind the ear. But the code that's used most of the time of these is the V5261. Represents the fact that it's a hearing aid, it's digital, binaural, BTE. What it doesn't tell you is the technology level. For example, the #1 hearing aid that's fit is the Phonak Marvel Audio product, which I have on the screen here. The highest technology is the V90, the Audio V90. That's their premium level technology. And as you go on down, you have their premium, their advanced, their mid-level to their budget level product. What some providers will do is they will, get authorization for a V5261 without disclosing what technology level they're fitting. So they'll ask for authorization for a premium level, or a premium level price, and they'll fit the budget level product without ever disclosing, are they fitting the high-end technology or the low-end technology. So it's always important to ask whether or not they're being fit with what technology level is being fit there. If you watch TV throughout the day and have it on the Game Show Network, for example, Belltone and Miracle Ear will advertise a lot throughout the day. We're starting to see more and more hearing aid ads on the TV. And as the most recognizable name, if you ask, any of your claimants, patients that wear hearing aids, the most recognizable name that people see out there is Miracle Ear. Miracle Ear, let's see if right here, Miracle Ear is nothing more than a private label, Siemens or Signia product. They charge a premium for that Miracle Ear label because they do such a great job branding it. The #2 most recognizable product is Belltone. Belltone also advertises a lot on TV, and they charge a premium for those names. It's just simply name recognition. But there's really only 5 main manufacturers in the industry. You have GN Resound, Savantos, which makes up Miracle Ear, Sonova, which is Phonak. It's actually the #1 product fit in the market. Starkey is the only US-based manufacturer. They're based in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Widex and Oticon. All these other manufacturers, these are all based in Europe. And it's interesting. There's no, Sony used to manufacture hearing aids. They don't anymore. Philips used to manufacture hearing aids. They don't anymore. Panasonic, all those typical Asian countries have gotten out of the marketplace. So, what accessories are, necessary versus excessive? Your hearing aids will amplify any sound that's in front of them. So any sound that's coming out of your TV, those hearing aids will amplify, but people always want a TV connector, neck loop. They want different devices will help those hearing aids connect. And they're really becoming obsolete because hearing aids are all Bluetooth now. So as long as you have a Bluetooth signal, your hearing aids can connect to that, and they can broadcast that sound directly to your hearing aids, controlled with a smartphone. The Oticon Open product, which I pointed out, that provider trying to charge $15,000 and $13,000 respectively prior in this presentation. Those devices can actually connect to your Wi-Fi. So if you have a smart thermostat, you have a Ring doorbell, you have a smart washer and dryer, your hearing aids can actually notify you then too when your laundry's done, someone's at your front door, or you can control the temperature directly through your hearing aids also. So that may or may not be medically necessary when it comes to fitting and authorizing hearing aids. Hearing aids now can be programmed remotely. This is something that really took off during the COVID timeframe, where patients no longer have to go in to see an audiologist and have those hearing aids programmed in person. If they have a good Wi-Fi signal, the audiologist can actually program those hearing aids remotely. Geotags, so hearing aids, if you walk into a restaurant and you increase the volume on your hearing aids, 4 decibel levels, next time you walk in that same restaurant, the hearing aids will recognize that you're in the same place and will automatically increase to your comfortable level that you listened to those hearing aids before at. All hearing aids are now controlled through, a smart device, your phone. They all have apps for it, so you can see, you can control volume, programs, you can change the different listening environments on your hearing aids directly through your phone. If you lose your hearing aids, just like Find My iPhone, you can also track down the last place your hearing aids were. You can send out a beacon from those hearing aids that hopefully you or someone else who is better hearing can hear, and help you find those hearing aids if they fell in the seat cushions of a couch somewhere. So it helps you find those hearing aids more often. And then, like I mentioned, being able to control the volumes and, the frequency controls, almost like an equalizer on your cell phone. So in summary, occupational hearing loss claims will likely be increasing, and they're going to be increasing because the number of baby boomers that are retiring that never had a true baseline or annual test as required by OSHA. Always reviewing, the clinical information by an independent professional is often helpful in maintaining sensibility. So just like, having an independent professional review whether or not the hearing loss is conductive or sensorial, if hearing aids are truly going to benefit the person, and if the hearing aids are going to benefit that person based on their lifestyle and their hearing loss, is always very important. And, there's a lot of groups out there that can offer that service. There are many hearing aid styles and accessories that are appropriate for claimants other than just the most premium levels. Just because you're spending more doesn't necessarily mean it's going to benefit the claimant or the patient, more. And then hearing aid pricing can fluctuate greatly from provider to provider and from region to region. And, it really should be pretty consistent pricing, across the country, regardless of where they're being fit with them. So with that, are there any questions? Darcy, did any more questions come in, or you want to open up the floor?
Yeah. Anybody have any? I don't see any new ones. Let me double check. But no, that's very informative. And oh, go ahead.
We got a great comment, says, wow, hearing aid technologies has come a long way.
It sure has.
Yeah, it has gone a long way, especially with being able to connect to Wi-Fi, and then with any smart device that you may have around your house. So even when you're gone, for example, someone clicks on your Ring doorbell, you can hear and talk to that person through your hearing aids, even if you're not right there in your house. It's pretty remarkable.
I'm not too sure if this question was asked, but it was about whether or not sensory something or other happens in both ears or usually just one.
Yeah.
I think this is addressed with that question of whether or not you can have, hearing loss in just one versus two hearing or both ears. And it's really, the exposure. Typically you're taking sound in both ears, but there are those environments where, a truck driver or a police officer might have the window rolled down, and the constant wind as they're driving their vehicle buffering against their ear can cause hearing loss in their left ear, isolated. So, but 95% of the time it is in both ears.
One more question that just came through. Could you please provide the impairment standard?
You want the impairment ratings? I can provide that on a worksheet, after this.
Okay.
But I don't have it, teed up here ready to share on the screen.
Okay.
And maybe Diane or you, Mandy, can forward that out to everyone.
Sure.
Sure. If anybody would like to have that, if you would email Darcy. Darcy, what is the email that they can reach you at?
Sure, it's darcy.simmons@paradigmcorp.com. So it's DARCIE.Simmons, SIMMONS @paradigmcorp.com.
Excellent.
And if anybody comes up with any questions, please just feel free to reach out anytime.
Yeah, it is truly amazing to see what has come along in the technology for hearing aids. And I hear too, and Jordan, you may have heard this too, that a lot of young kids are wanting hearing aids now because of the Bluetooth portion of it.
Yeah. You know, putting things in your ears has become more and more acceptable out there, right? You know, I talk about cosmetics and vanity being the #1 reason why people don't wear hearing aids today, but you know, that's really changed pretty fast because you know, we're used to seeing people with things in their ears, all sorts of different shaped things. And, you know, with the connectivity with hearing aids, being able to connect to your phone, you know, listen to podcasts, music, you know, speak on the phone directly through your hearing aids has become, you know, a lot more, you know, it has made it a lot more accessible, and more people are willing to wear hearing aids just because of those benefits and features.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you and Mandy for joining me today and for a great program. We really appreciate you guys being part of our 12 CEUs of Christmas. Anybody have any parting words that they would like to say before we end our podcast? Okay, it doesn't look like it, so I'm going to wish all of you a happy holidays. I see a lot of you have been with us for multiple programs. Some of you have been with us for 8 programs, so that's really fantastic. And we look forward to filling out the rest of the 12 CEUs with you next week. All right, now, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.